Before a man ever feels pressure, before he is asked to bend, before the moment that reveals whether he will hold, there is a quieter erosion taking place. Nothing is wrong yet. Life functions. Responsibilities are met. People would say he's doing fine, but something has already begun to slip. Not in his behavior, in his posture towards himself. He starts agreeing faster than he feels, explaining things before deciding, smiling where something tightens internally. Not because he is dishonest, but because the nervous system has learned that agreement keeps things smooth. This is how the line disappears long before it is tested. Men are trained early to trade internal truth for external stability, to soften their edges, to be reasonable, flexible, to not make things difficult. Over time, the body learns a pattern. Pressure to compliance, then to relief. And the relief feels like safety. This is why the earliest betrayals do not feel dramatic. They feel practical. They feel mature and adult. Until one day, a man realizes he no longer knows where he actually stands. Not because someone crossed a boundary, but because he stopped noticing when he crossed his own. This is the soil in which self-abandonment grows. And by the time the real test arrives, the nervous system is already trained to move the line. There comes a moment in a man's life where the world does not attack him. It now tests whether he will bend. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in ways that look like open conflict even, but quietly, through pressure, through compromise, through convenience, through requests that arrive dressed as reason, through things like expectations that were never agreed to, but somehow become assumed, through the subtle suggestion that it would simply be easier to let this one thing slide. This is the moment most men abandon themselves. Not because they are weak, not because they lack courage, but because they were never taught how to hold a line when the threat is comfort, not danger. They were taught how to endure pain. They were taught how to survive chaos. They were taught how to push through crisis after crisis. But they were never taught how to remain intact when nothing dramatic is happening. When no one is shouting, when no one is forcing their hand, when no one is clearly in the wrong, when the cost of bending looks harmless and the reward looks immediate. This is the place where the real test begins. Because nothing is being taken from you. You are being asked to give something up. voluntarily, and most men do. Holding the line does not mean control, and it does not mean dominance. It does not mean force, and it does not mean becoming rigid. It does not also mean becoming cold, and it definitely does not mean becoming aggressive. Holding the line means there is a boundary inside of you that does not move. Not because you are stubborn, not because you are reactive, but because you are clear. You have already decided who you are before the pressure arrives. You are not discovering your values in the moment. You are not negotiating your inner integrity under external stress. You are not improvising your standards to fit the room. Most men fail here because they still need that external permission. They still need that reassurance that they are allowed to say no. They need agreement before they feel safe standing firm in themselves. They need approval before they trust their own decisions. So when that pressure finally arrives, they hesitate, they soften, they explain, they compromise, just enough to keep the peace. A man who holds the line has already crossed that threshold. He does not ask the world who he is. He does not wait for consensus to exist. He does not dilute himself to preserve belonging. He stands where he stands and allows the consequences to arrive. When a man begins to stabilize, the world does not relax. It presses. Old dynamics begin to resurface. People who benefited from your flexibility test your availability again. Situations appear that tempt you to betray your standards just this once. Again, not overtly, subtly. And it's not a big deal. You're being too serious. Why are you making this difficult? You've changed. Remember, this is not punishment. This is the calibration. The world is not asking whether you have values. In these moments, it's asking whether those values survive inconvenience or survive when it costs you. It is asking one question: is this identity real? Or does it just collapse when something costs? Most men discover here that their standards only exist when conditions are favorable. They hold the line when it's easy. They hold the line when they are supported. They hold the line when there's no immediate downside to them, no cost. And the moment pressure arrives, the line moves, it shifts. And the world notices that immediately, because the world always tests what claims strength. A man who cannot regulate himself cannot hold a line, because pressure does not test beliefs. It tests the nervous system, and the body always answers first. When that pressure arrives, what happens? Do you explain? Do you justify? Do you overtalk? Do you collapse inward and quietly resent everyone involved? Or do you stay contained? This is where masculinity stops being philosophical and becomes instead physiological. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your mind searches around for an escape route. A regulated man notices this, and he does not let that steer him. He does not rush to relieve discomfort. He does not leak energy through performance. He does not turn pressure into another drama. He stays present. He stays slow. He stays clear. This capacity is not confidence. It is conditioning. It's a habit. The ability to remain grounded while the world waits to see whether you will flinch. And so a man who cannot regulate himself will always try to relieve himself in one way, shape or form. And one of the most common ways men relieve themselves is through language. They explain, they justify, they clarify, they overtalk, not because explanation is needed, but because their nervous system is trying to somehow discharge that pressure. Words become a release valve, a coping mechanism. And every time a man leaks pressure through this kind of performance, he trains his body, his nervous system, to believe that discomfort must be escaped. This is why so many men talk themselves out of their own lines. They don't move the line because they change their mind. Instead, they move the line because they cannot hold the sensation of being the bad guy in someone else's story, in someone else's figment of imagination. This is what pressure is actually testing. It's not about your intelligence. It's not about your logic. It's not about your moral argument. Your capacity to remain intact while someone disapproves of you is what is going on. This is why holding the line is physiological. Your body naturally will want to move towards comfort, soften the edge, make it okay, make it socially acceptable, make it smooth again. And a regulated man feels that impulse and does not obey it, does not chase after that. He stays within himself, he stays contained. He does not rush to repair the room. He does not rush to be understood. He does not trade his own coherence for some temporary peace. He breathes. He slows. He lets the pressure sit inside his chest without converting it into behavior. This is not confidence. Again, this is the conditioning. This is the habit. A man becomes unshakable by staying present in small moments of discomfort, until finally his nervous system stops treating discomfort as danger, as something to escape from. Most men are not afraid of conflict. They are afraid of the sensation that conflict creates in their body. So they follow the habit and they collapse into niceness. They collapse into humor. They collapse into explanations, over talking, finally collapsing into compromise. Not because they are weak, They do this because they were never trained to hold internal pressure without leaking. Holding the line is not a philosophy. It is containment in action. It is the ability to keep your energy inside your body when it would be so much easier to spill it out into the room. And until a man trains this, his boundaries will always be negotiable. Not necessarily because he wants them to be, but because physiologically his nervous system does. Walls come from fear. Boundaries come from clarity. A wall reacts, and a boundary stands. A wall always needs defense. A boundary does not. A boundary does not argue. It does not persuade. And it does not seek validation. It simply exists. This is why men who argue their boundaries do not have boundaries yet. They are still trying to convince the world instead of standing inside their own decision. A clean boundary removes ambiguity. And ambiguity is what invites pressure. When your line is clear, others may not like it, but they can feel it, and eventually they will stop testing it. Not because they agree, but because they recognize coherence inside of you. They recognize that this boundary stands in and of itself, and they recognize that this boundary is no longer a wall which you are trying to defend all the time. Here is the part that no one prepares you for. Holding the line will cost you. It will cost you relationships that only survived because you bent and you were useful. It will cost you the roles that required your constant self-betrayal to maintain. It will cost you comforts that depended on you staying agreeable and small. It will cost you illusions about who was actually aligned with you versus who was taking advantage. This is where many men retreat. They mistake this kind of loss for failure. They mistake resistance for more danger. They mistake discomfort for a warning sign. So again, they soften. They lower themselves. They explain again. They move the line just enough to restore familiarity, but that restoration is temporary. It's a short-term fix, and each time the line moves, something else erodes. What holding the line gives you is not praise. It is not approval, and it is not safety. What it gives you is something rare and noble and honorable and unique. Self-trust under pressure. Not arrogance or confidence or bravado. Not self-esteem, self-trust. The knowledge that when things get uncomfortable, you do not abandon yourself. That currency cannot be borrowed. It must be earned. Something subtle happens when a man holds the line long enough. The world stops pushing. Not because it agrees, not because it approves, but because pressure only exists where movement is possible. When you stop moving, the test ends. Expectations just somehow adjust. Dynamics reorganize. Conversations simplify. What once felt like constant friction begins to settle into quiet respect and admiration. This is how leadership emerges without force, not through dominance, not through bravado, not through volume, not through threat, but through aligned consistency. A man who does not bend does not need to convince anyone. The hardest line to hold is not with others. It's the line you hold with yourself. When no one is watching, when discipline would be so easy to abandon, when comfort whispers seduction, this is where most men actually lose the battle. Not publicly, not in front of witnesses, privately, in the small moments where the standard is easy to abandon, because no consequence arrives immediately. This is the real pressure, not confrontation, comfort, boredom, the quiet invitation to drift. The inner line is held when no reward is coming, when no one is praising you, when no one is checking up on you, when nothing external is forcing your hand. This is where the nervous system reveals what it has been trained to do. What is the instinctual habit? Because the body remembers these patterns. It always remembers when pressure happens and you move to relief, when tension is there and you escape, when discomfort comes and you numb. So when you are alone and the tension rises, your system will suggest the familiar exit. Just this once. Just to take the edge off. Just to feel normal. Just to rest. And this is where a man either becomes reliable to himself or he doesn't. A man does not become unshakable by holding the line once. He becomes unshakable by holding it repeatedly, consistently, in the moments that feel insignificant and irrelevant. That is what builds self-trust. Not motivation, not intensity, not vows made in emotional peaks. Self-trust is built in the quiet. The moment you keep your word when it would be so easy to break it. The moment you stay aligned when it would be so easy to drift again. The moment you choose restraint when the world would never know you didn't. Because if you collapse privately, you teach your body that the line is conditional. And a conditional line eventually becomes no line at all. But if you learn the practice of holding the line in private, you begin to feel something rare, a spine that does not depend on mood. That is the foundation. That is what makes a man stable in public. Because public integrity is only private integrity, repeated long enough that it becomes an identity. This is where the man is forged. It is not in the confrontation. It is in the restraint, it is in private, not in being seen, but in remaining aligned when no reward is coming. This is the line that determines whether everything else is real. Because a man who collapses privately will eventually collapse publicly. And a man who holds the line in private, well, he becomes unshakable in public. If you cannot hold the line, everything you build eventually collapses. If you can, life begins to organize itself around you. Not because you demand it, but because you no longer move. This is not rigidity. This is structural integrity. And this integrity has gravity. Men like you do not arrive here by accident.